Bitcoin for AI, or at least analyzing how AI is going to be breaking out of data centers and how we can use like technology, much like Bitcoin, and like how we could use like early primitives of blockchain to maybe unlock more benefits from AI. So I'd love to kind of kick off this panel by giving everybody a chance to quickly introduce themselves before we like jump into questions.
I'm Trevor from Sapien, and we give enterprise companies access to the world's largest network of human data producers.
I'm Julio from Cluster AI. We are a decentralized inference and fine-tuning engine, and what we are set is to make AI available to everyone in the world.
Hey, I'm Paul with Render, and Render is used to generate graphics. We are used heavily across Hollywood. A lot of the movies you see, some component of the movie was rendered on the Render network. Things like the Sphere, the graphics for the Sphere. NASA uses the Render network to generate graphics, so widely used, and the token for rendering.
Hey, I'm Vlad. I'm head of BD at Cosmo Capital. We're a liquid token fund based out of Chicago. We invest heavily in the BitTensor ecosystem. We have a subsidiary called Nakamoto Mining that runs a validator on the BitTensor network, and we also mine and do fine-tuning on the network. So that's why I'm here.
All right, so I'd like to kick this off by asking if there is a path for AI to truly follow like a decentralization similar to how we did for financial technology, like with Bitcoin, or is this going to be harder for like autonomous intelligence, unlike for finance, or is there like a bridge between the two, in your opinions?
Yeah, I can start. So if you look at the grand scheme of things, like AI is a problem similar to Bitcoin in the sense that it is a mathematical problem and it can be decomposed so multiple nodes can participate and solve the same mathematical problem. But it's way different in another way, which is in Bitcoin you don't have sensitive data traveling to these machines. You don't have an end user who really doesn't care that things are decentralized. And for me, it is all about value. So Bitcoin has a really clear value of why it has to be decentralized. And there's value both for people using Bitcoin and for the miners themselves. So on AI, there's no value really for the demand for it to be decentralized unless there is some advantages of some trade-off that a decentralized network provides. And then for the supply side, we can cover that later, but there's also about incentives and value for the suppliers, right? For a Bitcoin miner, it's very clear what value they get if they put a mining rig. They can like create an Excel sheet and see like what the value is very quickly. And if you're a user of Bitcoin, you can also see the value of Bitcoin. You can transfer money, there's no borders, there's no like nothing. But for AI, it's all about value, right? And I think we're still figuring that out. It's one of the missions for Cluster.
Yeah, for the more philosophical thing about decentralization and centralization of AI versus crypto, I don't have as strong of a comment, but for us at a more kind of granular, like tactical level, we've noticed, like we're an AI data production company, and the way that a lot of these data foundries, as they're called, it's like NVIDIA's a chip foundry, now there's also data foundries that are producing like new cutting edge custom data for these models because all the general open data has already been used, so the next frontier is like new interesting data that hasn't been trained on. And so it turns out that being distributed in data production is better. So a lot of data is produced in labeling facilities by these big kind of hyperscaler data companies that have thousands of people in these facilities producing data. But it turns out diversity and decentralization produces better data. So if you have 28,000 dudes from one country in a data center producing data or structuring data, you get suboptimal biased results. So that's one thing we've learned in terms of why decentralized AI. Well, at least on the data side, for our particular use case to build custom data for enterprise, it does matter to have the broadest range of humans, the most diversity produces better data.
So I have a specific, if you want to go.
No, you can go on.
All right, I have a specific question for Paul, actually, from Render. Now, you guys are decentralizing compute for training. Like, what do you see the biggest value of decentralized and biggest risks are in like your field, and why did you choose to decentralize it rather than using like a centralized data center or like a compute farm?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the last panel was all about agents and decentralized agents and running those. And decentralized compute matches that architecture, right? So if you're running an agent that's on the blockchain that is looking, it's not being ran in a hyperscaler data center, matching where your compute's done, running that on the render network on a blockchain that's distributed matches the whole architecture. So from a risk perspective, from a benefits perspective, they all match up. And the power of consumer GPUs, which is the core of the render network, is going up day by day, right? I mean, week by week, we get more powerful image generation models, language models that fit on a 4090 or something that we see a lot on the render network. And so, these models are going to be state-of-the-art, and we're going to be able to run state-of-the-art models both for image gen and language generation on the render network. And it's going to be very exciting to have the power of decentralization be accessible to a wide range of people.
Let's see. So there are when you decentralize AI, it kind of opens up a larger kind of area for attack vectors, right? Like when you're going to decentralize agents, or when you're trying to have AI transact on chain. How do you guys think about the complexities that decentralization kind of exposes AI to, and why put yourself through that when you have centralized solutions in place?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of risks in centralized solutions as well. I mean, if you don't control the data center on AWS or GCP, I mean, there's risks to that as well. And by bringing down the cost dramatically, we're able to do security checks, do inference checks, run the model multiple times. Diversity of generation there is a really powerful security paradigm that by leveraging decentralization, you don't have to trust Amazon, you don't have to trust a hyperscaler. The trust is built into the network and can be verified. And so I think that's an important benefit. I mean, yes, you have to do the architecture well, you have to do security well, you have to the things we've learned in the crypto community about how do you build a secure blockchain decentralized project all apply to AI on the chain, but it also provides some real advantages as well.
Yeah, I would say as well that not only in the compute part there's attack vectors, it's also how the model is created, what is the training set, what is the process to train, and closed models, you don't really know what's happening behind doors, right? So by having a decentralized and completely transparent process end-to-end on how to create a model, it ensures also that things are more secure and better to use in production.
Yeah, you could be paying for ChatGPT 7 or whatever the most expensive one is, and it's not actually running that. You'd have no idea, right?
I mean, within the context of BitTensor, I think a lot of the security stuff in terms of whether the models are reliable and are producing useful data, it comes down to this validator ecosystem. So BitTensor is unique in that it has what they define as validators is validating quality of work. So one of the things that, a term that's starting to be used now, something I call proof of useful work. So kind of a play on Bitcoin proof of work. Bitcoin's proof of work is kind of arbitrary math solving, and within the context of AI, it's actually solving useful problems to that people need an answer to. And so the validator ecosystem within BitTensor, the whole job here is to do a good job of validating the output of the people mining the subnets. Yeah.
So that kind of brings us to the question around incentives, right? Most people are doing this in order to get incentivized in some way. How do you make sure that the people that are coming in aren't really here to farm? That's a huge problem across most Web3 companies, that you introduce incentives and that becomes malaligned very quickly. So how do you kind of make sure that whether it's incentivizing data or labeling or compute or agent production, whatever it might be across the AI stack, how do you make sure that those incentives are truly aligned and you're incentivizing good behavior, not bad behavior?
Yeah, for us, that's the question. So the question of, can you produce quality data in a distributed model was the hypothesis that we started out, while maintaining quality. And the problem is exactly what you said, is people will Sybil attack the network. And they'll, if our customers are paying for humans to do RLHF on data sets, and we have bots doing it, they're not going to be very happy. So we have to have A, good authentication, but B, we don't have like hierarchical QA. We have to figure out a way to do it in a distributed way that's automated. And so that was like the problem set that we started with. And we started kind of experimenting with different techniques, some kind of more traditional stuff like mean reversion and anomaly detection. And we did some stuff with like probabilistic modeling where we gave the same question to thousands of different labelers, and we could kind of build a distribution over who we think is being accurate, with the ultimate goal of giving them real-time feedback on how well their labels are. But then it actually turns out we were looking too far back. Like right in front of us is the best consensus crypto incentives and consensus mechanisms like stake. Like we have staking now, so people they have the option to stake while they're playing to earn more rewards, but they have the threat of getting slashed. Just like that's how Bitcoin and proof of stake and everything else gets secured, is there's penalties if you don't follow the rules. So it's a non-solved problem, at least in data production where we are, but it is the hypothesis we started with. How do you ensure quality in a distributed model? So we're working on that.
Yeah, and in Cluster, for example, we have an incentive for people to bring their own GPUs, right? So if you're like data center, imagine you have H200s, and you know that you can put them on contract and get $2 an hour for those things. So what is the incentive for data centers to say, I'm going to participate in this decentralized network, right? Like sometimes it doesn't make sense for them. So we have a program where every week we talk to all of our suppliers, and we tell them like, this is the number of cards we need, and these are the price that we're willing to pay for. And they look at their excess capacity, and then they assign that excess capacity to our decentralized network. And that way, it's a win-win situation because we pass the cost savings into the demand, and there's an incentive for the demand to use Cluster instead of other providers because they pay less for the service, right? So everyone is incentivized, and that's how we fuel the marketplace.
Yeah, I think in some way it's almost like a venture capital feedback loop problem because venture capitalists have the same problem. It's like, okay, how's my startup doing? You got to look at like, how much product market fit we're getting. Eventually, it's like revenues, things like that. And so I think like within the context of something like BitTensor, the network has just upgraded this model called dynamic tau, which gives each of the subnet on the network its own token. So now you have like kind of tau be the money of the network, and every subnet token be kind of like an investment, a startup within the network. And so that model basically allows the investors in the token to decide, okay, how are we? They get to vote on how they direct future emissions of the token. And so that provides a financial incentive to like say, okay, like I am going to reward the stuff that's actually being quality work beyond just the validator ecosystem itself doing the same thing. The other example I'll give is a data startup called Vana. They've had this problem ever since they launched. They've launched these things called data DAOs, and of course it's being botted and farmed. I think there's an interesting idea of like rewarding data DAOs at the point of the data being used instead of it being contributed. I think there's probably some technical work to be done around that, but I think it makes a lot more sense to reward the contributors at the point of their stuff actually being used to train AI models, things like that.
Just one super quick point, like the points programs and these kind of incentives get a bad rap. I've kind of come around though that they're actually really powerful. I think having a token, having a way to give your users ownership of the network early on and incentivize them to use it so you can kind of get out of the chicken and egg problem is one of the most legitimate things you can do in a crypto network, is that you have an advantage where you can do what PayPal did and just bribe people to sign up by paying them, but you can do it in a more ownership incentivized way. And but that's only part one. Part two is you got to keep them.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Like if you can get a lot of people in the door and they're leaving, you're halfway there, but it's better than nothing, and it's up to us as the founders and engineers in the company to actually like figure out how to build products that they stay. But it's a great mechanism to get people to come.
I actually kind of really believe in what you were saying before about like how do you only pay people out once something is used, and we're building an agent project where we're trying to get contributors to contribute towards like specialized vertical agents, and the only way that their contribution has any value is if the agent gets hired and that contribution is used, and we have to value attribute back to that contribution and then do a retrospective payment, right? But the current system of pre-incentivizing folks with like incentives ahead of time gives them it gives it a bad rap, because at the end of the day, they're just giving it for usage, and then they can kind of, put up bots, or you can Sybil attack it, or you just spin up as much garbage as possible. And that's a huge problem for AI, because garbage in, garbage out, and that's like a structure that we're all seeing right now. And I think that's like a big pain point that needs to be solved. I know Anna from Vanna, and that's sort of like a problem that they're currently facing as well. So definitely. Now, when you think about incentives, one of the questions that I've been having in this space are we've got established systems, right, that we've been using, staking, retro funding. What are some ideas that you guys have around new innovative ways that we can approach incentive design in this space?
So I'm big on distributing incentives, distribution to the community. So again, I think BitTensor is doing this cool with DTAO. The other one that's weirdly relevant here is, if you guys really like the DGen token on Farcaster. So what DGen did that was interesting was they said we're going to do this token, we're going to give a bunch of community members the initial allocation, and then we're going to do seasons where we release more tokens, but those tokens are going to be released based on people tipping posts, right? So you post on Farcaster and you get a DGen tip, and everybody, a DGen holder gets a certain allocation based on how relevant they are to the ecosystem, how many tokens they have. But it's essentially like a proof of contribution, proof of useful work that's entirely reliant on the community deciding on what good output is, what useful contribution is. So I like that approach a lot.
I think that's the key is thinking through what metric you're trying to optimize for. The old school example was when Blur designed their points program. Every other NFT marketplace was optimizing for volume, but then you had people react to that and just do kind of wash trades, and then it wasn't real traction. And so Pac-Man's well, let's do something that's more interesting and harder to game, like liquidity provisioning. So it changes, and then that gets gamed and stuff, but you kind of always got to be thinking about what metric you're trying to optimize for and what's the most sustainable growth channel for your protocol.
Awesome. We're at time. I did have one last question, and just a quick thought on outside of trading and agents kind of transacting on chain, where do you think Web3 is going to actually start adopting AI?
I think it's one of our cluster missions is specialized models. If we, not talking about agents, but if we see AI taking over the world, running every single AI operation on a huge model that consumes power and resources is not sustainable in the future. So smaller models are really specialized at good or perfect at what they do. I think that's the future, and we're going to see that being adopted a lot in Web3.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it already very much on the render network, where our bread and butter before was you use Blender or something, you use distributed GPUs, you get the output of that. It's very easy for that to become standard diffusion or another leading edge image generation model. It's just a super natural movement. And so, yeah, no, it's a very natural next step for our network, and we're seeing big adoption of that already. So, yeah, that's here today.
I like the idea of AI being trained on blockchain data. That's the easiest source of public data there is, and the easiest way to attribute data to a certain person and reward them for it. So I'd love to see more projects just leveraging their AI models just based on blockchain data.
Thanks, everyone.